All right, friends. Good evening, friends, readers, and book lovers. My name is Elizabeth Boscher, and I am the events coordinator for Schuler Books. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight virtually for our event with Tim Johnston in celebration of his newest title, Distant Sons, an absorbing new crime novel set in a small Wisconsin town still haunted by the unsolved disappearances of three boys in the 1970s. Tim Johnston is the author of the novels Descent and The Current, the story collection Irish Girl, and the young adult novel Never So Green. He holds degrees from the University of Iowa and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He is the recipient of the 2015 Iowa Author Award and currently lives in Iowa City, Iowa. Schuler Books is an independent bookstore with 4 locations in Michigan. You can follow along with all the bookstore happenings on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as through our weekly newsletter. If you still need a copy of Distant Sons or one of Tim's previous books and wish to support this independent bookstore, please reference the links in the chat that I'm going to drop in here now, or visit one of our brick and mortar locations in Grand Rapids, Okemos, Ann Arbor, or West Bloomfield. You can also visit our website and see a wide array of books at schulerbooks.com. We're about to begin here, so just a couple of reminders. Feel free to chat amongst yourselves in the chat, and I will try to keep an eye on that. But you can also drop questions in the Q&A bubble, and we will get to that in the second half of this event. Now, without further ado, welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great to be here. Lucky to be here.
Yeah. I like to start by asking authors to describe their book. Most of us have probably read the blurb, but I always think that having the author describe their own work brings something a little different to it. So what is Distant Sons?
Well, you covered it. You gave a little synopsis. I was going to give my 10-second synopsis, but that's pretty much it. How's it go? 2 young men meet by chance and set off a chain reaction of violence in a small town where 3 small boys went missing in the 1970s. So one thing that it's hard to discuss this book fully without talking about the previous 2 books. It's not a series, but there are the 2 main young men that I just mentioned who meet in this book came from the previous 2 books, one from Descent and one from The Current.
Okay.
And so, but you don't have to read those books. Those backgrounds are their backgrounds, but you don't have to know them to read this book and appreciate it. It's supposed to be a standalone novel, and so far it has been standing alone just fine. So these 2 guys happen to meet by chance, and chance has a lot to do, a big role to play in this book. And they meet in this town where they have nothing to do with the 3 small boys who went missing 40 years ago. Of course, they're far too young to have had any, connection to that. It's just chance that they end up at this town, but they do become involved with people who have connections and memories of that time. That story has kind of become the town's story, almost its curse. And they're meeting in this town, and the people they meet, the townsfolk they meet, does set off a sort of domino effect that has serious implications for their lives and for the lives of people in town, and also for that 40-year-old mystery. And by the end, those 2 time periods have come together, and there's cataclysms and earthquakes and fireworks, and everything is resolved. And that's it. Yeah, that's my sum up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. That's a great sum up. And we love an ending that has some kind of resolution.
Don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of my thing that I don't feel like I have to tie up every loose end, because I kind of think, well, life isn't like that, and fiction can be like that. But I think it's safe to say that the major ones in this one are all tied up by the end.
Awesome. Now, when you were writing the other 2 novels, did you know that this was going to kind of become a continuation of characters? Did you have an idea of where these characters would end up?
No, as in most in most everything I write, I have no idea where people are going to end up. But there are sort of clues. If you know these two books, there are clues. I mean, at the end of the previous book, The Current, one of these characters, whose name is Dan Young, is just plain missing, and it's a pretty big loose end. But people thought, well, he must be planning a serial, but I was not planning a serial. I just was like, I kind of like not knowing what happened to him. You can kind of sort of try and decide yourself and figure out from, what's going on previously in the book. But that kind of just sort of stayed in my brain. I kind of was thinking about him in my brain, what did actually happen to him and where might he have ended up. And it happens that at the end of that book, he is, just by the circumstances where the book takes place, he is leaving his home state of Minnesota, and on his way, he's kind of escaping his hometown, and he's on his way toward Wisconsin. And all they find of him is his truck by the side of the road facing the Mississippi River, where you would cross from Wisconsin or from Minnesota into Wisconsin. And there's a bullet hole in it, and the reader knows where the bullet hole came from, but everybody else does not. So
yeah.
And so he's kind of like, well, what happened to him? Did he get across? Did he go into the river? So, and in the previous book before that, Descent, which is about a family that goes up into the mountains, and their daughter goes missing. And by the end of the book, and there's a younger brother who's 15 when she goes missing, and by the end of the book, he's like 18. And I'll just say what's left of the family is going back to Wisconsin, which is where they happen to be from. Nothing's planned here. But they happen to be from Wisconsin, and they're heading back there. And Sean Courtland is the young man's name, and he happens to be following the rest of the family in his father's old pickup truck. And the line goes, he's following them for now. And it's just two words that are just sort of slipped in there, but they've always suggested to me that things have been too sort of damaged in this family, and with him in particular, and he's not going to be able to go back and just sort of resume life with his family in Wisconsin. So he's just following them for now. And I always thought at some point they're going to look in the rearview mirror and he's just going to be gone. I don't write that, but that's kind of how I imagined it. And so now in this book, the time frame is pretty literal, and we're about from the time when those books take place and when I was writing them, but we're about 4 years later on, and now he's a young man of 20. Well, I guess it'd be more like 7 years since Descent, but he's a young man of 26, and he's still driving around trying to find work as a carpenter, sort of making his living. And his family is in Wisconsin, and he has this. And the reason I thought about this idea of the two of them meeting is that he also has a reason to be in Wisconsin, as it happens. He has a vague idea of going to see his father at least and check in and say hello.
Yeah.
And his truck breaks down, and he's forced to sort of stay where he is and make money just to repair his truck so he can move on again. Yeah. And he's still about 2 hours away from Madison and very near the river where we last saw Danny Young's truck. So there was this sort of circumstantial accident of place that logically they could be in the same place at the same time. And that influenced me also. Yeah. But it wasn't planned. It was more like, well, what am I going to work on now that I finished the last book? And this idea, when it came to me, I always go back. I think it's Stephen King who said this, but if you have a great idea for a story, don't write it down in your notebook, which is where bad ideas go to be immortalized, but do your best to forget it. And if you can't forget it, then start writing, which is not to say I thought this was a great idea, but it was an idea I couldn't get out of my mind. And it was blocking anything else from getting in. There's not a whole lot of space in there to begin with. And so finally, I just started writing it more or less to get it out and see if it would take, as a novel. And not all of them do, but this one took, and I, and that's how it began.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
And this is just in terms of where the whole scheme of things come from structurally. I'm a big fan of Cormac McCarthy's Border trilogy. And in that trilogy, in the first two books, there's there's two stories of two separate young men who have nothing to do with each other, but they happen to be sort of from the same place in Texas.
Yeah.
And they cross into Mexico and have their adventures. In the third book, with no explanation whatsoever, they're now friends, and they have a new adventure of their own, and there are certain themes that cross over, so to speak. And I just always like that idea that there's no sort of explanation other than they probably are doing the same kind of work in the same part of Texas, and they end up on the same ranch working together and become friends. But I wanted to show that moment when these two guys meet in the very beginning of their relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there's many levels to the title of this book, Distant Sons. But I like that part of that is that Sean is like so close to his father, but so far away.
Yeah,
Still.
almost made it.
Like he almost made it, but like,
Yeah,
and you can
yeah,
definitely tell right at the get-go that like there is dissonance in the family, and that he kind of wants to go home, but like maybe doesn't really, and like
yeah,
um
yeah.
yeah, so
I think he's conflicted about it, and I think Dan Young is in much the same place.
yeah,
The difference is he would like to go home, but there's a good reason that he can't or shouldn't.
yeah, yeah. So all the sons being distant.
And they're kind of both sort of, they're both sort of wary. They're not gonna like guys who open up easily to other people, and certainly not to people they just met. So
Absolutely.
they're slow to sort of learn each other's, backgrounds and stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But if you happen to have read those other two books, and you know a lot more about them than they know about each other.
yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, you kind of touched on it and mentioned it, but these two characters end up in a small town in Wisconsin. And it seems to be a trademark of your work that you have built in these strong senses of place, especially in the Midwest and in like firmly planted in the Midwest. But why Wisconsin? Why did you choose Wisconsin? You're not living in Wisconsin.
No, I've not spent a lot of time in Wisconsin, but I figured it out. And it goes back to descent. When I went out there as a carpenter, I was a carpenter for many, many years. And I went out there to work on a house in the Rocky Mountains that my father and stepmother were building it as a kind of a rental slash family ski vacation house. And my father finally convinced me to go out there and do all the finish work. And that is what I was doing when I got the idea for Descent, which is about a family from the Midwest. I didn't want them to come from Iowa. I wanted them to come from some other Midwestern place that wasn't my home state.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, what good, solid Midwestern state should they come from? And the entire time, this house, the entire time I was there, and still is there, it was on Badger Lane up in the mountains. And they were all the streets were named after rodents, and of one kind or another, like badger and weasel and wolverine. And but I like the sound of badger, and I thought it was a good symbol for Caitlin, the daughter who vanishes, who's a runner, and she's going to go to school in the fall and be on scholarship for track and field, so she'll be a badger. And so that's why Wisconsin. And again, it was just like, well, I want a good solid Midwestern origin for these guys who are going to the mountains and have never seen anything like them before. And then with Danny, it was again sort of just chance that he was up in Minnesota, and the nearest border from the area that I sort of was placing that story in, the nearest border was the Mississippi and Wisconsin on the other side.
Nice.
That's
Yeah.
Wisconsin. Yeah. Now
So
I have to admit, I didn't go to this area of Wisconsin and spend a lot of time researching. In
yeah,
fact, I did none of that. But I'm familiar with the Upper Iowa area,
yeah,
and I know what bluffs look like and trees, and and there's Google, and I did a lot of sort of Googling around enough that I could get a kind of lay of the land, and then I just made up the rest because I don't like to name towns specifically, because then people take it too literally, and I don't
Right.
feel as free to move stuff around to my convenience to make things work more conveniently for me.
Yeah.
You know.
For sure. Well, that was going to be my next question is, did you do any research in that vein?
Yeah,
But
well, if you call Google Maps research, yeah, I did that.
down that path, though, was there any research that you felt like you had to do for this book to kind of make the plot work or make these characters come alive?
Boy, you know, there wasn't a whole lot that I just didn't already sort of wasn't able just to make up and
Yeah.
wing, other than the actual place and the sort of layout of things. I did a little research into, there's a detective who shows up in the story, Detective Viegas, and she works for a certain department in the police department, and it's sensitive crimes. And I did look up what that part of Minnesota, what it would be called in that part of Minnesota, what that department, you know, it's like SUV or SVU. What is it on TV? SVU?
SVU, yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to know what they actually called it in that part of Wisconsin. So I did a little research on that, and that's I lifted it right off of the website and put it right in the book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But Sean is a carpenter and you were a carpenter, so that was
Yeah,
probably like a fairly
yeah,
easy
yeah.
connection to
There's a
make.
scene where they're cracking open a waste pipe. They're doing a plumbing refitting, and I did sort of I double checked on that tool to make sure I was describing it properly. That's a particular tool they use.
Yeah,
But otherwise, yeah, I pretty much know that stuff far too well. You know,
yeah,
having done it for like 25 years of my life.
right, right.
It's an easy one to fall back on. And I think that's, you know, there's a lot of it in the book. I'll just warn people, but it matters, and the way they do things matters to me.
Yeah,
And it was kind of a it was kind of like, for me, it was a freeing to go back and write about carpentry without having to do it as a living. You know, it was like, oh, I'm far enough away from that now that I can sort of appreciate it creatively and put it into a narrative in this way.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, the old adage of write what you know comes
Yeah,
into play for
yeah,
sure.
for that part, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Well, even though you hadn't been to this area of Wisconsin recently or anything, it does come alive on the page of just this group of characters of Midwesterners and a rural area. But I'm curious, do you have any like favorite characters that you like to write, or was there a specific character in this book that was a favorite of yours to craft and to spend time with?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about characters. You know, you have to sort of get to know them as you would anybody. And the ones I think, and you know, and for me, because I don't plot or anything, I just sort of make stuff up as I go. I never really know if other than Danny and Sean, who, you know, I knew were going to sort of be the anchors to the book. Anybody else who came into the book, I wasn't sure how big of a role they were going to have. Like I just mentioned, the detective. She's interviewing Sean because Sean got into a fight at a local bar, which is something he's been kind of doing for years. But and so I said, well, I've got to have a detective come in and they got to have a conversation because it's going to give us some background on what Sean's been up to and his character and all this kind of thing, without showing the actual fight. It's just like the aftermath of the fight. So I thought, well, I'll just make up this detective. She'll be a female detective, and her name will be, I don't know, how about Vegas, and la da 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 da. So, but then at the end of the interview, she lets Sean go, and he's not in any serious trouble, and he goes out to smoke one of his cigarettes, which he still does. If people remember, Scent is fairly smoky book, but he's out there smoking. It's like 3 a.m, and she walks out, and they just start talking. You know, it's not the interview is over, and now they're just talking, and they reveal a little about. She reveals a little about her life, and borrows a cigarette from him, and so now she's sort of a little bit more embedded in the novel. And then, you know, Dan Young is sort of still in trouble, and by one way or another, I won't go into the details. she gets interested in Dan Young, what Dan Young might be doing in this town, and starts to look for him. So now she's a real character in the novel, and it matters because and at one point I thought, well, how can I make her matter even more? Well, she has a father who was a sheriff back in the 1970s, a deputy sheriff, when they were trying to, when those three boys went missing 3 consecutive summers. And he was part of the police force that failed to solve the crimes. And now he's out of police enforcement. He's a lawyer. But there's that connection back to that time. So anyway, which is all to say that she became somebody who was very interesting to me and fun to write.
Yeah.
And another favorite character is Sean is in the interview with the detective because during the fight, the waitress at the tavern got hit in the face, and it's actually he hit her, but it was by accident. He was trying to hit the other guy who was being abusive toward her verbally. So eventually we meet Denise, the waitress, and I love writing about her. She's great, but her father was a real pleasure for me. Her father was a great surprise, and
I loved meeting her father.
For whatever reason, the first time Sean comes over, he's trying to make amends by doing a little bit of carpentry work for her, and the carpentry work is to widen the doors as best he can, which is hard to do, but you can take out some of the trim work and make them the jambs and make them a little wider, because her father is wheelchair bound and rolls around and he hits his knuckles. So the first time you see him, he's in a wheelchair, and I don't know who he is or what he's going to say, but then he starts talking, and he becomes, to me, one of the most interesting and fun characters in the novel.
Yeah. I like that. And I agree, he was very fun to read as well. All of those characters were very fun to read.
It's a fun book, isn't it?
It is a fun book, yes. I mean, as much fun as we have with crime and missing boys, but
right,
still.
Yeah, no, fun isn't often a word, so it's often more like dark and twisted.
Yes, but the characters bring a lot of life to it and a lot of reality to it as well. So thinking about your writing process, you said you don't plot things out, but what does writing look like for you? What is your process like? Maybe what time of day do you write? People are always interested to know what that looks like.
Generally the morning, if that's the question. Generally the morning. My habit is to, when I am writing, let's be clear about it first, because there's long periods of times when I'm not actually physically writing, but I might be having an idea in my head that I'm trying to forget. So I consider that part of the process. But so generally, yes, I will get out of bed pretty early in the morning, and I will go directly to my sofa and lie down again. And if I don't fall back asleep, I'll read for a while. And if I don't fall back asleep, on the best of days, the reading quickly gives way to writing whatever I'm working on. So the laptop is right there, and I put it literally on my lap on a pillow at a certain height, so my arms don't, my neck, I've got a little nest there. So I'll work there as long as I can, or until the dog has to, be taken out for the bike ride, and then hopefully I'll come back and keep working. And it's nice, I'm lucky now that I don't have to go off and do carpentry, but for a long time that had to be negotiated, but now it's like, well, if I want to take all day, I will take all day. And that's kind of been my rule for writing for a while now. It's like, if I'm only going to be able to write for a couple of hours, I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to wait until I know, because I start getting antsy. I start thinking about the clock, and what I really want to do is just not think about the clock as much as possible, and just become immersed for as long as possible.
Yeah.
So that's when it's going well, that's every day, and that's what I do.
Yeah. Awesome. You mentioned one author that inspires you, but what other authors have you found inspiration for in your own writing journey? And
Yeah, well, I mentioned Cormac McCarthy, I think
Yep. Yeah. Yes.
was a good big influence. Just 1 second.
Yeah.
Can you just take her with you for a second? Thanks. Yeah. I don't think that was actually UPS, but I think it was my neighbor. So other authors. Boy, I'm kind of all over the place. I always mention, and it's not because he's a strong influence, because I don't think he's a strong influence on my writing, but he's somebody I love to read, is a guy named Teju Cole, who wrote a great book called Open City, has a new book out called Tremor, which I'm not very far into. I don't generally read this. I generally tend to read more literary stuff and not, the kind of crime and mystery that I'm often categorized as. It's not because I don't like it, it's just not my habit. I just have never caught really the taste for it.
Yeah.
I read like Stephen King. It's not really mystery Stephen King. It's more like thriller and terror, but I read a lot of that when I was a younger person, and I think that has sort of creeped back into things. See, I went to school and got all that Stephen King, kicked out of me by the academy. You're supposed to start reading Joyce and Virginia Woolf and the canon. And I did that and relished it for a long time. And I think that, then I went to graduate school and did more of it. And I think you see that in my writing, the influence of more literary stories and novels. James Salter is a favorite short story writer of mine. And I think there's influence there. I don't know. I don't know. I'm kind of all over the place as a reader. So
Yeah. I love that though. And I think it makes sense that maybe that you don't read in your own genre. I've heard other authors talk about not wanting to like kind of accidentally mimic another author in their same genre.
right.
But
So it's nice to read
yeah,
something completely
different.
but and that is, but when I am reading, when I am writing, I'll often go back to books that I've already read.
Yeah.
Because it's really more about the sentences and the stimulation of reading, rather than the story. I don't want to have to worry about and think about the story. I'm just sort of going for comfort reading, something that I know how it's going to turn out, and I just want to I want to be as close to jumping off and writing myself as possible. So if I get immersed in somebody else's story, then I'm not going to be doing it as easily.
Then we won't get the book as fast.
Yeah, exactly. So it's in everybody's best interest.
Is there a book that you have reread the most?
Well, the Teju Cole book I mentioned, Open City, I probably read like once a year, just because it's like it's the least plotted book you can imagine, but the sentences are just stunningly clean and beautiful and musical, and there's a deepness to the story that's very interesting, but you have to really pay attention to get it, so that's a book I've gone back to many times. I mentioned James Salter. I would go back and read his stories. I'll go back and read Joyce. I'll go back and read, the Dead, the short story collection. I'll go back and read Cormac McCarthy, who I've already mentioned. I've got a bookshelf I should probably just go over and look at, but those are the books like, now I just want to read something that I love, and I'll just read it again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can see how those are definitely influences into your work as well. All right, we have a couple audience questions, and if anyone else from our audience has questions, feel free to drop them in that Q&A bubble, and I will feed them to Tim. And these two are actually kind of similar. So we have Paul here maybe trying to make a little trouble, asking how much of the book is written by AI. But then we also have Darvin, who asks, sorry if this has been asked, but how freaked out are you by AI, if at all?
Wow. So AI is going to be a big thing. It's going to be a big subject. Well, the first answer is none for the wise guy, because it was written before AI was invented. Yeah, pretty soon we're gonna have disclaimers saying, none, this is all absolutely human content,
Yeah,
not AI driven at all.
yeah,
I'm concerned about it in a lot of ways. I'm not concerned about it for me personally. I mean, I don't know, if someone wants to try and AI generate a sort of Tim Johnston book, that would be easy enough to do. They just have to, the books have to be fed into the system and then a new story plopped out. But I think we'll catch it pretty quickly. I
yeah,
don't think it'll get very far before we tackle it and take it down and, hit it with our fists. But yeah, I think it's going to make a lot of difference in a lot of creative work, particularly with movie imagery. But I think it's going to be tough scholastically. In the schools, they're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I think it can be a great asset and assist to many things in medicine and research and things. But yeah, I think creatively, it's kind of a Pandora's box. It's not going to go back in the box.
yeah, yep. But there's something about the human element that I don't
Yeah,
think would
we like
be
to think
replaced.
so. We like to think so, but
So,
some of the things that are being produced just
yeah,
by little prompts can be very convincing.
yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
It,
Stay
it'll,
tuned.
yeah, what can we predict at this point? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I
Who
don't know.
knows? But
End of
for
end of
now,
the
I am
world.
thankful for authors still writing.
Yes, so am I. And I don't think that will change. It's just going to be, more like, well, I mean, you could, and I've asked friends of mine, if you didn't know a book was written by AI and you really loved it, and you got to the end and you realized it was written by AI, would it change how you felt about it? You know, and would you read another one written by the same AI computer? It's
Yeah,
like, how much does it matter to you that it was written by an actual human being?
right, right, right.
That's going to be sort of a central question, I think.
Yeah, big questions to ponder.
Yeah. Good luck going to a book event and getting your book signed by an AI,
Right.
though.
Good luck having an AI tell you all about how they came up with their characters.
Yeah, they could probably even fake that. They would probably access a Zoom meeting like this and steal some of that content.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, to return back to the book that we are talking about tonight, my one of my questions is you have very intriguing covers for all of your books.
Oh,
Did
good.
you have any input into what this cover looked like this time?
For once I really didn't.
Yeah.
I did in the first two. Um, too much. I think they were like hearing from me too much. And they were like, okay, we'll let the pros do it now. So this one, there was no real discussion. I kind of had a general sense of a couple of images, but they hired this out, went outside of the publishing company and hired an actual book designer to do it. And this was her first effort. This is
Oh,
the first thing she showed us, basically. I think the colors got changed a little, and maybe the
yeah.
font got a little bigger or something. But it's maybe hard for people to see, but there's a sort of a house in the woods, and then there's if you go back a little, it's all imprinted, sort of superimposed on this sort of barn door kind of thing with a hinge up there. It looks almost like a weapon to me, which I like. But that seems very appropriate image wise to the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a good choice
Thanks, I like it. Yeah, everybody was pretty happy with it,
for sure. Yeah. Hopefully it
which
will
is
help
always
it.
nice. It's always nice that to have that response rather than
Yeah.
like the first one I saw of Descent was like, yeah, that's kind of in the ballpark, but it looks totally wrong, man. It gives off the totally wrong vibe.
Yeah.
Totally fine.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, a question from Neil over here, which was also going to be one of my questions, but we'll let Neil take it. Any hints, teasers as to what's next book-wise from Tim Johnston? Can we expect any of the characters from Distant Suns to be revisited in forthcoming books?
Well, now that I've done it, I've shown that I'm willing to do it. And So I wouldn't be surprised. I don't generally like to talk in too much detail about what I might be working on, but I will say that I'm not doing the physical typing of anything just yet. I'm still, and if you go back, if you look at all the publication dates of all my books, it's about 3 or 4 years between them, and that starts at the publication date, not when I started writing the last one. So
Yeah.
I got a few years here, but yeah, I all I can say is it will likely be a novel in the same sort of literary suspense genre, because that just seems to be my sweet spot. But and there are characters who are interesting to me. We will not see Sean or Danny again. We're done with those guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't mean to be vague about it, but I just can't. I don't have any firm idea at this point.
That's okay. We don't have it yet.
Right.
We will wait eagerly for.
I'm waiting for that idea that I have to, that I can't get out of my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because that's where the best work comes from, right? The one that you can't.
Well, right. Well, that's where the only work comes from, as far as I'm concerned. It's not like I had ideas, all over the place. Like some novelists, some writers have
Yeah.
got them backed up going out the door, and they can't get to them soon enough. And it's like, no, when I'm working on one idea, that's all I can handle, and I'm completely consumed by it until it's
Yeah.
completely done. And then even after it's done, there's a period of sort of clearing out the air and
Yeah.
clearing space for the next one.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, maybe that helps with this next question. Jenna asks, how do you deal with writer's block or other challenges in the writing process? Maybe that's part of what you just addressed.
Yeah. Well, I don't really consider it block. I consider it more like it's gonna, and this is like coming up with the new idea to write about. It's more like it's just gonna take as long as it's going to take. But there have been times when I've reached a certain point in a narrative where it's not really block. It's more like, geez, this is really not going where I thought it was going to go, and I haven't figured out now how to change things to resolve it. And it's not block. It's more like a challenge. It's like a puzzle that needs to be figured out. It's not like I'm suddenly there's nothing in my brain. It's more like, geez, I've got these two sort of verging paths, and how do I get them to come back again to make sense? And in the case of Descent, I stopped working on that book for maybe, I don't know, I still want to say like maybe a year, because I just wasn't sure how to move on. I also had a lot of carpentry work to do, so that was always sort of delaying the process, but in a good way, I think. And when I finally figured out, oh, this is how it goes forward. There's this character who has been in the book all along. I really didn't know what he was doing in the book, and now it makes sense that he will do this thing in the book that will get us moving again. And after that, the writing went very quickly.
Yeah.
And that goes to sort of the process having an effect on the reading process also, because I didn't expect that turn of events, and I think it makes the surprise of it that much more effective for the reader.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't telegraphing it, it was like, oh,
Right.
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
And readers have responded, with likewise.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hate it when you got it all figured out, what's going to happen, and then doggone it, it just goes ahead and happens and doesn't surprise you in some way.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're a non-plotter, and even as a plotter, you have to be ready for things that you weren't ready for, and go with the flow and do what's right and natural for the character, and not try to force things.
Yeah. Yeah. Some authors kind of talk about like their characters talking to them throughout the process. Do you feel that as you're writing?
Sometimes, I mean, again, going back to Descent, I felt those characters sort of haunting me before I started writing about them. I didn't really have their voices.
Yeah.
But I also kind of, once I got into the book, there was a certain sort of kind of survivalist despair kind of voice that they all had, having sort of had this horrific experience and which hadn't been resolved. And that voice can sort of like just sort of take on a general kind of tone that you hear in your head. And in this book, it was more like I would go around and like riding the bike with the dog. I would see scenes that around my neck of the woods that I kind of had transplanted into this made up Wisconsin place.
Yeah.
And I would go by and I would say, oh, this is from what's her name's that day she went down and looked for this or that. And they became these familiar signposts for me from the book. Like I couldn't tell my life from the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say they're talking to me. They really don't start talking until I start letting them.
Yeah. Yeah. But they do seem to have a mind of their own to a degree.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yes. And like I said, they do surprising things and say surprising things.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of that's just part of the creative process, I think.
Right. Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation, Tim. If anybody else has any final questions, feel free to drop them in now. I will do another little plug. If you have not ordered your copy of Distant Sons, this is a fantastic book that you should check out. And I have dropped the links for all 3 of your novels in the chat that you can order from us if you would like to support this indie bookstore. And just a quick reminder, supporting indie bookstores helps your communities, helps our bookstores, and helps the authors to purchase a physical copy of the book.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Support your local indie bookstore.
Yes, thank you so much. Tim, how can people maybe follow along with your work? Is there a place online that they can follow along with maybe in 3 years when the next book comes out?
Well, I will when I get back to normal life, I will from time to time do a drop a post on my website and or on Facebook or on Instagram. Other than that, yeah, I don't know because I'm pretty quiet about it. I've kind of tend to lay low until I've got something to show people, and
Yeah.
So, but I'll check in from time to time on those platforms.
That's fair. Well, to our audience, keep an eye out in the next few years for the next
Hey, I might
Tim
surprise you.
Johnston.
It might come faster this time. You never know.
We don't know pressure anyone, but
Particularly with AI out there. Just saying.
we also would not complain about a faster timeline. I mean, from the reader perspective, we're
Yeah.
big fans.
Yeah, I know. I'm doing the best I can here.
Doing a great job. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Paul. You devil.